Welcome back. Extreme heat waves in NYC are increasingly becoming more prevalent because of the climate crisis. These heat waves are a growing concern for environmental justice organizations like We Act. In an effort to address this issue, We Act joined forces with several organizations to form the Extreme Heat Coalition. Joining me to discuss this topic is the Resiliency Coordinator for We Act, Caleb Smith. Caleb, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you just tell us a little bit more about your organization, We Act?
Yes, so We Act was founded in 1988 in Harlem. We, at our core, are focused on making sure that people of color and low-income communities are included in the sound and just creation of environmental policy. And that's increasingly including more work on climate justice. I'm really focused particularly on extreme heat. And one major initiative that we've launched earlier this year is launching the Extreme Heat Coalition. We have about 7 members based between New York City and Yonkers, and we bring a diverse range of areas of expertise and work focused on uplifting health equity for vulnerable residents in urban areas. And so we're in the process of expanding to other major metropolitan areas throughout New York State.
So I wanted to actually ask you a little bit more about the Extreme Heat Coalition. As I mentioned, it was like kind of like a collaboration between a lot of different organizations. Can you just tell me a little bit more about how that actually began and what the specific purpose of the Extreme Heat Coalition is?
Yes. So the Extreme Heat Coalition is part of our Heat, Health, and Equity initiative, and that started, I believe, in 2019. We are focused on making sure that residents that are particularly vulnerable to the urban heat island effect are protected through policy, adaptation planning, and investment in resilient infrastructure.
Now, what I really, I guess a question that's very interesting to me is basically it's very simple, but what is the climate crisis? And I'm asking this because I feel that a lot of times in conversations about the environment, sometimes people will say climate change. I know previously it was global warming, and sometimes the term is, I guess, used interchangeably. So could you just explain, maybe why we're using the term climate crisis right now?
Yes. So I think it makes a lot of sense just by definition. A crisis refers to a time where it's very difficult and there are a lot of obstacles ahead, and serious decisions need to be made to prevent dangerous consequences. And we're in that right now. Our elected officials have been putting off these critical decision points for decades. And so to talk about global warming, climate change, without recognizing our role and the things that we can do to prevent catastrophic conditions for the world and for people, I think doesn't give the full picture. And so right now, people of color in the United States and across the globe are experiencing some of those effects much more severely than white and wealthy counterparts.
Okay, so pretty much it is like they're all similar, but just using crisis kind of lets people know that this is actually a problem and not something that's just naturally happening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that. Now, how is the crisis causing these heat waves?
Yes. So just to rewind a little bit, the climate crisis is driven by the burning of fossil fuels. We are forcing carbon into the atmosphere that's been buried for thousands of years. And once it's up there, it stays for hundreds of years. And that prevents a lot of the energy from the sun from going back out into space. And the consequence of that is we need to make sure, sorry, can you?
Well, yeah, basically, I just want to know how these heat waves were. How is the climate crisis causing these heat waves?
So the climate crisis is causing these heat waves because the conditions that cause a heat wave are basically high pressure weather systems in the atmosphere. And a lot of that has to do with complex things like jet streams, which are really fast bands of wind that move high up in the atmosphere. And now we're seeing that hotter global temperatures are slowing down the jet streams. So what that does is it makes these high pressure systems that cause heat waves linger over our cities for longer. And cities, especially, are more vulnerable because of the urban heat island effect. That refers to the phenomenon where the high density of buildings and very little natural land cover traps a lot more heat. So that's why we're experiencing it so much more severely in places like New York City, but also the south and southwest portions of the United States really have not had the benefit of jet streams moving at the speed that they have historically.
Now you talked about how it's affecting New York City. I'm curious. You also mentioned that a lot of your work kind of focuses on people of color, or like highlights the disparities people of color face in regard to environmental injustices. Can you just talk about how we see that play out in New York City?
Yes. So in New York City, the differences are really pronounced. Uh, Black New Yorkers experience heat related illness and heat death at twice the rate of their white neighbors. And that's a result of historic environmental racism, things like redlining. Redlining is a policy from the 1930s Homeowners Loan Corporation, which basically blocked the flow of investment into areas where Black people and immigrants lived. And the result of that is that our built environment has a lot less shade, a lot more building materials that trap a lot of heat, poorly maintained apartments that have a lot of leaks in them, issues with pests, and other things that make it really difficult to cool them down.
And I also want to add that we recently did a segment about like mold, which also, contributes to a lot of the poor health a lot of Black and brown people face in our city. So, I mean, seeing this add on to it is just like, it's really shocking to hear. Now, I also want to know what other communities in New York are facing health risks due to these heat waves. The first one that comes to mind is possibly elders or people with physical disabilities. Can you just talk about maybe how this could be affecting them as well?
Yes, there are a lot of groups that faced heightened risk when we're talking about extreme heat. Elders and young children, especially, pregnant people, folks that are on common antidepressants, all have difficulty with their regulating their temperature. Just that's the physiology. But there's also folks that experience asthma who are facing additional health issues because of extreme heat. It aggravates asthma and can cause more attacks, resulting in missed school or work and even hospitalizations. And especially in areas like northern Manhattan and many parts of the Bronx, we have much higher rates of asthma.
Now, I'm also sure that possibly being in a low income family could affect this. What is the cost of living in a city facing constant heat waves?
Yeah, so the issue is that low income households already are spending way too much of their monthly income on just their energy costs. And especially in New York, there's not a lot of infrastructure and more equitable and fair ways of pricing energy. So what that means is people are sacrificing their income to pay for their electricity bill instead of paying for things they might need like medication or food. And it really creates stark differences in terms of how we can take care of ourselves.
Now, your organization says New York City and New York State have been slow to respond to the public health threat of extreme heat. Can you just expand on that a little bit more and, talk about the fact that this is like a public health threat?
Yes. So some of the ways that we really want to see New York City and New York State respond to extreme heat are pretty straightforward. For example, at the city level, we have launched some digital campaigns to make sure that folks are aware of things that the city can do. One is investing in our green spaces and making sure that we're planning for them long term and making sure that those investments flow equitably. This is in the Urban Forest Master Plan, which is currently in council. Uh, then additionally, we want to see that the city mandate an indoor maximum temperature. Folks may be aware that there is a minimum temperature that landlords are accountable to provide in their apartments during the winter, but there's no equivalent for that in the summer. So we want city council to engage with the community and think really comprehensively about how everyone's right to cooling is protected.
And I can imagine that also kind of plays into the fact that like a lot of people are spending more money because if there's no set like temperature for the building, they're probably going to be using their ACs more. Which is that even good for the environment to, I guess, even use the AC that often? Just a quick question.
Right. So that's really great that you brought that up. Air conditioning usage does contribute to greenhouse gas emission, but in the short term, we understand that is what people need, but that's why through mandating an indoor maximum temperature, we can chart out a path towards more sustainable cooling. And also at the state level, we have been active supporters of things like the All Electric Buildings Act and a similar city level bill, Local Law 154, that starting in 2024, buildings with 7 stories or lower will be required to have electric cooling. And with also at the state level, we're working on getting the Energy Efficiency, Equity, and Jobs Act passed, which will create jobs in mitigating health hazards and leaky walls and roofs that need to be fixed before energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies can be implemented in the buildings that need it most.
Well, Caleb, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this important discussion.
Thank you so much. And folks who want more information about the work that we do, they can visit us at weact.org/heat. That'll have all of our digital actions available for them.
Right, so you heard it. To learn more about We Act's effort to combat the heat issue in NYC, please go to their website, www.weact.org/heat, or follow them on social media at WeAct4EJ. Stay tuned. We have more open for you right after this.